Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. This is our regular time on Wednesdays, and I'm very excited because it is Food Allergy Awareness Week, and I've got my teal on to celebrate. And I am bringing you this wonderful woman right here, Chef Martha Morgan. She is the CEO and founder of Allergy Dragon. She is a chef by training since she was 16. She's been cooking in kitchens since then. And she became a food allergy mom as well as a food allergy and celiac disease eater.
Yeah,
Eater,
patient, whatever you want to call me.
patient eater, whatever you want to call it, years ago. So she's here to help us understand misconceptions one meal at a time on how to reduce waste and provide happiness. So, hello, Martha.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you again.
I am so excited. I mean, and for everybody to know, I mean, we met online on LinkedIn or other social media platforms, and then we actually had the opportunity to catch up in person over lunch a couple of weeks ago when I was in Louisville for the exhibitor show. So and I just learned so much from you. And that 2 hours we were together.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it feels like it didn't feel like it was 2 hours either. So it was
it
just.
didn't. Yeah, no, it was great. Like we'd known each other for forever.
Mhm.
And if you're watching, we've got it on Facebook here, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter on my end, and then Facebook and YouTube from Martha's end, Allergy Dragon.
Mhm.
Please feel free to comment and ask questions in the chat if you've got them. We're here to answer your questions as we talk through the challenges as well as the misconceptions about food allergies. So Martha, yes, this week I've had on, yesterday we talked about the US food code, and the day before I talked about how to sell catering, around food allergies and dietary restrictions. And it's a challenge for sure, but you threw yourself into it full force because your daughter went into anaphylactic shock, right?
Yeah, at 9 months of age. So back in 2003, before labeling laws even got up and running, I was kind of thrust into food allergies, and then later on in 2009, celiac disease. So yeah, and I had already been a chef, professionally cooking since, like I said, 16, or you already said. And I was like, wow, okay. So first I was like, I don't know what to do because they don't really teach you this, in chef school. You learn like some basics, and you learn, safe food handling, things like that, but you don't necessarily know what food allergies are or celiac disease are. I have no clue. And so then I had to also not only raise my child, but then it was like, I've been working for 10 years. How do I do my job? Like it was definitely being, thrown to the wolves, so to speak, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because it was kind of like the only guidance was, well, don't feed them peanuts, tree nuts, and strawberries, and good luck. And that was pretty much it.
Wow. And so that completely changes your perspective on how to make food.
It does, because
Oops.
you realize, like, it's not so much, I mean, basic things for a chef is to have safe food and water for all of your, customers. Same thing with your
Oh,
family. But then another thing would be the fact that, you now have to create an even safer environment and safer foods for your child. And it was definitely eye-opening. And then I decided, oh my goodness, I can do this. Like, I can do this. It Even as much as it was thrown to me and I was like, I can't do this, I can't do this, because I think you have to have like a mommy meltdown and just kind of freak out and then
right.
regroup, because it's like everybody's got their thing in their life. I have a child that's on the autism spectrum. I have our middle child with other issues, and then here's me. Each kid has their own set of issues, is what I call it, but instructional needs,
Right.
and you don't get the pamphlet for it. So then it was like, oh, well, this is going to be our thing, and then it just seemed to be more things and more things added on, and once we had the food allergies, then it was like, oh, I found out I was sick with food allergies. I didn't know I was having allergic reactions because we had never had them before in the family. And
Wow.
then celiac disease came later, And honestly, I was like 400, over 400 pounds. And I was like, I, I was just, everything was going into food for my kids and life living for my kids. And I had just given up on myself because all the doctors kept telling me was, you need to lose weight, you need to lose weight. And so celiac disease, we know, is like failure to thrive, is like one of the
Hmm.
definitions they use.
Right.
And so that can be different for everybody, just like food allergies is a spectrum. So a celiac disease. And for me, it was over 400 pounds. My hair is falling out, teeth are falling out, 5 miscarriages. And
Wow.
yeah, in 3 years. And so we had adopted my middle son. And just for happenstance, it was 2, 3 months after we got him in our custody, I became pregnant with our youngest child. And I remember telling my husband, I was like, if I don't carry this one, no more like we're not, I said it much meaner to my husband, but it was just like, we're not doing this anymore. I just can't take it. And so luckily I was able to carry Vesper and, then, like I said, introduced us to food allergies, found out I had food allergies, which was causing a lot of my migraines and
Hmm.
stomach issues, but not all of them. And then found out celiac disease. And honestly, the only reason I found that out was because my mom was watching a TV show and they said, hey, this diet, this G-free diet is supposed to help kids on the autism spectrum and ADD. And my son is 13 at the time and has those issues. And he also is very skinny, but not gaunt. But he always has
Uh-huh.
dark circles under his eyes, and it was always very hard for him to speak. So I was like, well, I'll get this book. So I got the book. I'm 4 chapters into it, and I think, oh my gosh, I think this is what's wrong with me. I had my gallbladder taken out when I was 14, et cetera, et cetera. Call my sister Cindy, who happens to have the exact same, have very similar issues, stomach
Uh-huh.
issues. And I said, I think I found out what's wrong with us. I think we have celiac disease. So through fighting for my children, because I'm a mom and I don't give up on my kids, but I'd given up on myself, I actually pretty much, my kids saved my life in a roundabout
Wow.
way because I
Hmm.
didn't stop fighting for them. And I definitely don't think I would be here now because I would be having even more health issues that I didn't know about, complications from undiagnosed things and being so overweight and not being mobile that yeah, I would be dead. I firmly
Wow.
believe that. Yeah. So
Well,
yeah, a lot to unpack, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and you're the second person that I know of whose weight was affected in what you would think would be the opposite way, that you have more weight than expected. And this other gentleman, when he found out he had celiac, he lost a ton of weight
hmm
because your body's not absorbing the nutrients that it needs.
Yeah, so it goes into like starvation mode. And then I
Mhm.
did research afterwards and found out it's like 1 to 4 people are actually overweight with celiac disease and don't know it. And I
Wow.
constantly felt hungry. I bet he did too, because our bodies are triggering, we're not absorbing, and then my body's saving everything for later, and it really does not need to do that. But we can't tell it that. And
Right.
I didn't know that that also messes with your metabolism, and because your body's trying to flush everything out. Same thing with a lot of my food allergies. For me, they were GI related, and at first, and migraine related. My migraines went completely away after found out the diagnosis of celiac disease and demanded to have testing done. So, because at first they didn't want to test me, I had to find a doctor that would test me and my oldest son because I firmly believed he had it as well. And
Right.
he had gone 13 years and he's on the autism spectrum, and we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And he all of a sudden looked at me after we had the testing done. We did have biopsy testing. And he was like, I think there's something up. I mean, just sits down. And this is about 6 weeks, not even a full 3 months, 6 weeks after being gluten free completely. And he was like, Mom, I'm like, what? This is odd because he's coming up and sitting down. And I was like, yeah, what? And he's like, I think there's something to this gluten free thing. And I was like, you think so? And he says, yeah, my stomach doesn't hurt anymore. And I said, what do you mean? And he says, my stomach hurt every time I ate. He just thought it was usual, that was normal. That was his normal.
Wow.
Yeah. And talk about some mom guilt there. Like, I didn't know, like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
you
I
know?
bet. Yeah. Because like you said, you're protecting your kids. You want to protect your kids, and you were fighting to find, how to save them and make sure they were healthy, and it, in the end it worked for both of you.
Yeah, and so then I transitioned from hospitals to from restaurants to hospitals about 8 years ago, and went into
Hmm.
a hospital kitchen. And because I got really kind of frustrated in the hospitality industry as far as like restaurants, because I would have people that would, we taste our foods, right?
Hmm.
So going into that, people question, and I come from Italian based, so I did a lot of pasta. Yeah, the celiac is around the pasta, breadsticks.
Yeah.
And so that's my background. And I had also done pastry. Pastry was my intro, and then I went into Italian
Wow.
based.
So
So
you're totally cooking everything that's making you ill.
yeah, pretty much, and at first I could just, really separate myself and just wear protective gear, make sure I'm always wearing gloves and washing my hands a lot. Then when I came home, I would take a shower and, change clothes and all that other good stuff. But after years and years of being in these situations, it became harder because the gluten's everywhere.
Right.
So for me personally, I had to kind of remove myself from that type of kitchen. That doesn't mean I can't create my own kitchen, which is why I kind of created Allergy Dragon. And no, it's not an actual restaurant, but it will eventually have four walls. And I just wanted to empower people because I found so many people that were, stuck in a rut.
Right.
And going from restaurant to a hospital setting, I was much more valued in a lot of ways. Not necessarily the ways you would think,
Uh-huh.
because you would think that like a hospital, I did anyway, when I went to a hospital setting, I was like, oh, well, they're going to really get me and understand me, et cetera, et cetera. No, I had no clue the big disconnect of being a patient in a hospital setting
Hmm.
and getting food. I did not realize that until I was there serving the population.
Right.
So I served patients, and we also served, cafeteria, did catering, all those things that I would do uh, in a regular restaurant style. But then we also had different governing boards. We didn't just have the health department. I joke now that like the health department is. People are like, what? And I'm like, health department's here. I'm like, okay. And I was like, if you have to deal with CMS or Joint Commission, you're like, okay, because both of those are, one's like a 3-day inspection. The other one's about a 4-day inspection.
Wow.
We had CMS involved because we also had a nursing home
Okay.
and on one of our floors. So that is, they come in for that. And then the one time we actually had CMS and Joint Commission at the exact same time on the same week. And it was both good and bad. But I described them as like the health department on steroids because it's 3 to 4 days of inspections and different things, and they're all looking for different things. So,
Hmm.
um, but yeah, health department to me, I'm like, psh, okay, come on back.
Come on, we got you. I've got you covered. I'm
Yeah,
good here. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, and I still have a tendency to do everything very more stringent to a hospital setting, and that type of thing when I do any type of food, which is good. I
Right.
think that so you have to deal with diets, and I learned, I already came in with a lot of knowledge about diets, but then I learned even more because there's like we dealt with an average of 20 to 30 therapeutic diets. Plus, then I got to learn about textures because I was in a long-term acute care setting. So that means we
Okay.
had like the sickest of the sick. We had people on trachs. We're a long-term acute facility, so people were going to be with us weeks, months, sometimes years, you know
Wow.
and this would be the only way they could take care of it. And so sometimes, I had to learn about dysphagia, which is a swallowing issue, and different textures and how those apply, different textures of water. Not everybody can have a drink of water, and which was very helpful for me because then we had to deal with EOE on a
Right.
level with my youngest kiddo. So when you have, I was like, oh, okay, well, let's do this,
Right.
and different things like this, and being able to deal with RDs that don't necessarily know a lot, but then definitely are willing to learn
Right.
and be like, okay, fine, you actually know a lot of what you're doing. So my first 6 months there, I felt like I didn't know if I could get it. Like my first month, I was like, oh my gosh. I was kind of shell shocked because I went in and I was like, I want to learn every single position, how we run things here, because it's different from a restaurant to a certain extent, obviously, because you have
Hmm.
a lot of more guidelines. And so I went in and I had everybody train me how to do their job because how can you manage people if you don't know how to do their job, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then I felt like I wasn't getting it. And it was like a full 30 days. And then finally I was like, it clicked. Now, if I went to a restaurant, okay, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but if I go to a restaurant, we don't have a 3-week or 4-week, cycle menu that's constantly changing. We do
Right.
there because our patients are there. You don't want to
Right.
eat the same thing every day.
Right.
You don't have these nutrition, steps that you have to definitely follow. We're not doing this fried. We're not doing this, etc. And so I could go dominate. I can go be in there about a week, and aside from some specials, I can run that place. Okay.
Yep.
But this was a new journey for me. I was like, what? But it was also like, it's been one of my favorite, especially when I first started, because I was valued. The people that hired me in were like, excuse me, like, do you realize the knowledge you possess? Oh my goodness. And I think I was 3 months in when we had our first celiac. And
it took you 3 months to get your first celiac. That's kind of amazing in a way.
it is, but it also makes you wonder how much stuff is not divulged, because we've got to realize that we are sick of the sick.
Right.
And so a lot of people are not verbal. They're not communicating. And if they don't have family, it makes me wonder how many people like that, how severe they are depending on their treatment and that kind of thing.
Right.
But we did. You would think it would be way more, but
Right.
we had so it took 3 months, and he was like freaking out, and I just looked at him, and he looked over at me, and light bulb went off, and he was like, oh, duh, I got you. And so after 3 months, kind of the reins were kind of held over, and it was like, here, you're going to do this, this, and this. And so I started immediately changing things. Like I said, he was like, you can change this. I trust you. And so back in that day, when I first started, we could actually help organize like what we bought in. Like we still had to follow the diet for the patients. We had to follow the RD's regulated diet.
Right.
And what they said for the hospital, but I could pick the products that were coming in. So let's say we were having tater tots and hamburgers, which, yes, there's an actual meal
at a hospital.
At a hospital. It's not their, but they're not eating it every day. So that's the thing. You're not eating it every day. So we have hamburgers and tater tots on for the patients. We also had turkey burgers too, and veggie burgers. So that was our three options. Main entree options and tater tots. So I was like, well, why not make those all gluten-free? Like, why not already make that gluten-free? And as long as I'm staying within budget, as long as I'm staying with, and people are happy, no big deal. So when I started changing things over, and I would change one product at a time, because obviously this is a business. We already have product in there. We're not going to throw that away. We're going to use it. When I got diagnosed, I didn't throw everything in my refrigerator away. I don't have that kind of money.
Right.
Right.
It's expensive.
It is. And I think that was a misconception, was, well, you can't do that here because everything's so expensive. I was like, well, if it's already built in my bottom line and I'm working from my main entrees, how many things are already naturally gluten-free?
A lot. Yeah.
Lots. So if my hamburger is processed, it's good meat, it's maybe it's a frozen patty, but it's good meat at the end of the day. It's not, doesn't have a bunch of fillers in it. It's processed clean. Then as far as I handling it, as long as it's being handled correctly, doesn't have a bun on it, it's gluten-free.
Right.
Okay. So my veggie burgers, I make sure the veggie burger is a gluten-free product, and I make sure my turkey burgers, well, the turkey burgers are a little bit harder because a lot of times you have to put breadcrumbs in those to make them still have moisture. So I didn't have a gluten-free turkey burger, but I had two options. Those other two options were definitely gluten-free. Then I found tater tots, and we were like, we're going to get the tater tots. I got argued because the tater tots were like $3 more a box. $3.
Right.
$3. And I said, really? You're going to argue with this? But you have volume discounting because, so how many you're going through? So I was like, I think it will work out in the end. Do you trust me? Because I did get some backlash because some of those products I brought in to try. Some of them I'd never tried before, and they were disgusting. Guess what? We didn't run them again. We ran through it, and we didn't use it. I would get one case in of an item if it was a company that I was not familiar with, and do that way. And so a lot of people would be, oh, it's just disgusting because it's gluten-free. I'm like, no, that's a texture. It's just not a good product, period, at the end of the day.
And, okay, so that's something you just said that to me there is important, because you and I talked about this at lunch that day,
Mhm.
is like people just, it's a misconception that gluten-free just is horrible because it's gluten-free. And you said it's maybe it's the texture, or it's the feel of it, right? Versus
Mhm.
and versus it being a good product. And that's where a lot of things, people don't taste it because it's gluten-free, but it's actually a really good product.
Right. And they kind of get like they already have a negative connotation because it says it's gluten free.
Right.
And so I literally started ripping off because some of my employees were like, excuse me, it's gluten free. It's going to be gross. I started ripping off the fact that it was gluten free whenever I got a new product in. I
Mm-hmm.
was like ripping this off so they didn't have the information.
Right.
And honestly, that's they would eat it and then it was like, oh, it was good. Now if there was a bad product, it was a bad product. But they couldn't tell
Right.
me it was gluten free
Right.
because it was bad, it was gluten free. And it's about texture, and everybody's different too. Cause like, you have texture issues. Some people, there's regular foods out there that, texture wise people hate, like melons. Some
Right.
people really hate melons because of the texture.
Right.
Yeah, they happen to be gluten free, but that doesn't mean that that's why you hate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a really good point. I'm like, I use and just think of different bagged or boxed cake mixes, right? Things
Hmm.
like that, right? Some of them don't work, and some, or even just recipes in general. And there was actually one recipe when I got diagnosed with an allergy to yeast, and it was called
Mm.
chicken and broccoli delight, which you probably should just avoid it by the title. But the kids loved it, but the adults were like, "Oh my gosh, we're never eating this again." And that's just, again, it's that texture thing. We were game to trying it, but it just, the recipe testing didn't do well,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you just have to be open to. So I have everything already in my absorbed in my bottom line. People actually started liking the food, stopped having this negative connotation. We started having patients coming in, or even like people, administrators coming in from other hospitals and having catered items. And they were like, oh, this is gluten free. And they were like, what? Really? Or people with, and oh, that's okay. That's fine. Or they would be like, can I, meet and talk with me? I'd be like, being sent up to CEO's office, and I'm like, what's wrong? And it was, no, I just want to talk to you. Because normally I can't eat at any of these functions, and you already have this set up, and then you had the biscuits and everything over here and the gravy to the side, but the eggs, the sausage, the bacon, the hash browns were all here because they were, and how you set it up is also how you need to think about how people are going to serve it.
Right.
It's more than just cooking the food; it's serving the food, safely as well. And he was like, and then he said, you had the fruit here, and I could eat it, and I didn't have to worry about cross contact or cross contamination because people had to walk over here to go get the bread, and they had to walk over here to get this. And he says, so this was completely gluten free. This was completely gluten free. And then we had like a severe nut allergy, as well. And they were like, oh my gosh, and you knew about that, and instead of with this oatmeal bar, you put the oatmeal, like all the toppings that would be an issue, you put them over here on the side, on a cart. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, it's not that difficult. People make it way more difficult than it needs to be. You just need to kind of think all the ways through, and that's where you have, I guess, the blessings of a chef or somebody that's in food service that has been serving a long time. You just got to think about how you're gonna, like, we can cook this safely, then we also
Right.
have to serve it safely. Keep it
Right.
hot, but serve it safely, and make people, really excited about their food. I had people that would be coming, or was it, we had one celiac patient that was like, oh my gosh, I've never had this much food before. Like, and I've never had this many
Wow.
options. And then it was like, what brand is this? What brand is that? Like, I've not had sausage in 10 years, things like that. And are you really sure that this is safe for me because it's too good? It's a really
Wow.
good
Yeah.
compliment, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to be scared because I have felt that way before. Like, are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so it's possible to be done, but unfortunately for us, a lot of people do have to deal with the fact that corporate America is corporate America, and they look at the
Mm-hmm.
money bottom line. And even though we were doing this, thriving, literally, because we, was it called, we had like after the first year of me doing this, and my boss was like, I really had questions on if this was going to work out. We have people happier than they have ever been. People have more trust in us.
Mm-hmm.
Patients have trust in us. Employees have trust in us. I knew everybody that worked there. They were like, "Oh, I've never been able to eat here." Blah blah blah.
Really? So
Yes, yeah, I've never been able
that's
to eat in the cafeteria, and
wow.
because I switched over our pan spray and everything. I mean, it like I said, it's just because some of these things, if you have it in there, and then like your employees, like we would still have allergens that would come in, and we would be like, "Hey, look, you can't use this and this." But they already have this set up, so it's just little things. It's don't cook the fish. You need to cook the fish in one of the separate ovens. We have 3 ovens. Make sure that tonight, because you have got someone who's severely allergic to fish, and that you're prepping correctly, et cetera, et cetera. But they already had like the gluten, or they things are already set in place. They already know
Right.
this product is already not free, so it's very minimal changes. And then, like I said, unfortunately, corporate comes in and then takes that power away from us.
Right.
Even though we had got, I guess we had a report, because different companies like Cisco out there, GFS, they'll give you, reports yearly, right? See where you're
Right.
at, what you did last year. And then they were like, you ordered, I can't remember the exact amount, but we had ordered quite a bit more than we had done before, because we had way more patients and way more employees.
Mm-hmm.
But you reduced your cost by 13%.
Wow.
And he looked over at me and he said, "Good job, Martha." And I was like, this is proof. So we have proof in numbers for the corporate people, but it's still getting taken away because there's other people that don't know how to manage. I mean, honestly, that's what it basically boils down to. Because they
Right.
group you together, they look at it, and you may be doing this awesome job, but you're not pulling enough of an issue. So then they go into these food buy contracts and that kind of thing,
Right.
and they can get a case of tater tots, for instance, for $8, and nobody else. If you're celiac, you can't eat them. I can't
Right.
get this. I can't get that, and it's frustrating on a level. So I got
Right.
sicker, but I also got my hands tied and figured out I couldn't. I tried to fight it a lot. I fought what I could,
Mm-hmm.
and but then also I started to get really sick with being in the food setting and having to. I mean, I love to cook, but I noticed if I was making anything that required me to deal with a lot of the wheat, even though I was wearing PPE before it was cool, like head to toe, like you would go into a room, PPE. I
Uh-huh.
was wearing that to cook in the back,
Wow.
and it just got to the point I was still getting sick. So I said, you know what, it's time for me to move on, and Allergy Dragon needs my focus, and so I still work in healthcare. I'm just in health information management, so I have set hours, and
Right.
I'm not in the
In
food
the,
every day, but I'm in
right.
my food every day, which is still fun. But
Yeah.
I do miss it to a certain degree. But I love what I'm doing with Allergy Dragon now, which is to go in and point out to people that it can be done.
Right.
I was like, I can't make the changes there, so I need to make the changes out here. So it's kind of why I
Well, I mean,
switched.
that case study, I mean, the fact that you ordered more, but you saved 13%, that's streamlining and looking at how you can combine all of those different dietary needs into that overall buying perspective.
Right, which increases confidence, which increases money.
Right. Right.
At the end
Exactly.
of the day, it does. So, but it's just having to put yourself out there and show it. And like I said, at the time, I thought I was like, I'm going to prove this, and I did prove it. I just didn't prove it enough, I guess,
Right.
to the right people is what I should say.
Hmm.
Because
Right.
it's numbers. It's numbers for a lot of them. Unfortunately, because people look at being a chef and they see the creativity and they see this, and they don't realize there's managerial parts behind it. So
Right.
if you don't have that ability, then you can't talk to those people in the suits that are, and they want just numbers. And
Right.
we fought it for a very long time. And like I said, we ran it for 5 years like that, streamlined with gluten free, having people come from other corporates and trying to do what we were doing there.
Wow.
And, but like I said, it didn't last,
Right.
unfortunately. And, but
You're
I'm not
not,
quitting.
yeah.
I'm not quitting. I'm going somewhere else, and because I really think I mean, I did it. I know it's possible.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So, because we're talking about the misconceptions, when slaying misconceptions about dietary needs
Mhm.
and food allergies. So besides the misconception, well, I guess there are some gluten-free foods that don't taste good, but there's other non-gluten-free foods or gluten-filled foods that don't taste great either, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
so what are some of the misconceptions besides that taste factor of that chefs can think about when they're designing menus? Because when you throw out, I've got an event coming up, I've got 25 different people with dietary restrictions, and I want to put a menu together that meets all of them if possible, right? What are
Mhm.
some tips and tricks that you can offer?
I would say definitely looking at your proteins and thinking about streamlining, because that's what you do as a chef anyway. You're going to think about how it's easiest for you and your people to cook,
Hmm.
to give quality food, and then also serving the food. So the biggest way to streamline is your main entree, your main course, and your main sides. Making
Right,
sure those are already gluten free or whatever allergens you have.
right.
And then if you do have to have certain allergen filled foods, because most of us are not going to not cut every single thing out, because for nutrition reasons, you want to have other foods
Right.
available
Yep.
because of different dietary issues. Everybody has
Right.
rights to delicious food. And so that's the biggest misconception, in my opinion, is like you could have a full entree. I mean, okay, roast itself is going to be not gluten. I mean, it is gluten free, like the meat itself that you're using in there. It's the ingredients you put in there. If you're putting flour in, why can't you use cornstarch? Why can't you use a gluten free flour in that item?
Hmm.
You can alter it very easy, minimally,
Right.
and still serve a good meal to people, and it also be gluten free. So
Right.
streamlining cost, it's not that big of a different cost difference if I'm putting gluten free flour or cornstarch or different things like that. Or if I'm using an alternate thing to thicken. You already have potatoes in there. You could also use potato starch,
Right.
traditionally with a pot roast. So let's just say meat and potatoes. That's the standard middle America meal anymore, even
Right.
though things are changing. And then you usually want to have a vegetarian or vegan option. I mean, that's just kind of standard practice anymore.
Right.
If you're not doing that, I don't know where you've been, but I mean, that's just, a standard option. So whatever you have vegan option, you just make sure it doesn't have wheat in it, or, the top 9 allergens, which there are
Right.
quite a few things out there. So I think getting, zoned in and completely, looking at the fact that you can't do this versus what you can do
Right.
instead. I feel like chefs will limit themselves because this is my wheelhouse and this is what I know, and I get safe. Everybody gets safe,
Right.
and I think that you need to not be safe. You need to listen to other people. And I have been around those chefs that this is how we've always done it. That is your
Right.
biggest kill switch.
Right.
That's your
Yeah.
biggest kill switch. Stop that. Just because you've done it that way doesn't mean that that's where the future of food is. And then I think that you
Right.
need to look at who's actually dealing with the event. And then cost, like you said, cost is a big factor. I've proved it
Hmm.
can be done. Really, just look at all of your costs and then streamlining. Is it easy for your how easy is it for your servers or your line people to produce this effectively,
Right.
efficiently? And the less pots and pans you're using, because you're using bigger pans, because you're using big
Right.
pots, it's just more food in the pot. You're not having to use separate time to create 17 different dishes. Stop making
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
stop making it complicated. It doesn't
Right.
have to be complicated. So all that.
Well, and that brings up a good point because I'm doing this event and the catering sales managers or service manager said, just send me the list of the people with the dietary needs and we'll create them separate plates. I'm like, but then that means and I've said this before this week, is like, that means you're creating 31 other plates,
Hmm.
right? Versus just eliminating, can you eliminate the gluten from this dish, or can you eliminate this from this? And then two other people can eat the same meal, right? So,
Exactly. You're
look,
making work harder on your employees.
right,
You are making life harder on the guests because now you're singling your guests out,
right,
in my opinion, which we already have an issue talking about our food issues to people. Like, we don't want to be the only person. I mean, I don't care anymore, but I know a lot of people do. You don't want to be the odd man out. Why can't
right,
I eat that? Or why
right.
can't you eat that? Because then what happens when you get the food and they like your food better? Can I take a bite? No, you got your food over there. I don't want to share. So yeah,
Yeah,
he's made his life way more complicated, and then that increases cost for everybody. So I mean, they're making it more complicated than it needs to be.
because that's labor costs, that's food costs.
Right.
It's not just, making a separate
Waste.
plate. It's
Yeah.
waste. Exactly. Right. because you're not going to, if you're going to make cupcakes, you're not going to make just 2 cupcakes when you make a batch, because you can't, whatever kind of recipe you have, a cupcake recipe doesn't take just to make 2 cupcakes, right? It makes a
Exactly.
lot more. So figuring that out. Having been a chef, and then you're thrust into this thing of being a food allergy mom, what was the first revelation that you had in changing the way that you were cooking?
I went completely scratch cooking at first because of the labeling laws.
Okay.
And I tried to get to know people, and I went more farm to table, even though
Okay.
that was a trend. I It's not a trend necessarily if you have food allergies, because you want to go to the people that are making your food, processing your food, and
Hmm.
it made me realize in way more it made me realize how food is medicine. But it can also be the
Hmm.
wrong medicine,
Oh,
and
that's a really good point.
I've seen it, and so it's like that was the first time it really kicked with me that what I'm putting in my body really does affect me, because I've been struggling with weight at this point, right?
Right.
And so I didn't realize how much this food and safe food was going to help my child live. And so it really changed my, instead of making just delicious food, obviously I want safe food,
Right.
but it made me redefine what I considered safe. And it made me redefine enjoyment for everybody and inclusion. I mean, it made me realize nutrition. It made me realize what I was putting in my body and what I was putting in my children on another level that I never thought. It's a level of understanding I never thought I would attain, let
Right.
alone, people talking to me because I am overweight. Really? Like, you look at every label, that type of thing. You look at nutrients, you look at fat, you look
Hmm.
at, yeah, I'm looking at everything now. And so it was a level of understanding I didn't think that most chefs don't have, in my opinion. And I think it's a
Right.
level of an understanding that everybody should have in the world, period.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Well, and even with my journey, I'm like looking at and thinking about prepackaged food. So think everything that's in the center of the grocery store, that's
mhm,
what has the label on it, right?
right.
And when you really do start reading them, it's mind-boggling what some items have in it. And my law, or my personal rule, is I try to look at ingredients or foods in that are already prepackaged that have 9 ingredients or less,
Mhm.
and 100% have are words that I can pronounce.
Yep. That's my big thing. I'm like, do you know what that word is?
Right. Exactly. And there was a time I was eating, because I can't sugar, I'm an allergy to yeast, and sugar promotes yeast growth.
Hmm.
And so I was doing the alternative sugars, the ones that begin with an M, and an etherol and all of
And
those
ethanol.
things.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
yep. And those actually cause some different kind of issues. So like just stick with natural sugars like honey and coconut sugar and things like that, or dates. I use a lot of dates and stuff when I'm doing that, grinding them up. But
Hmm.
it really does play, it kind of just wreaks havoc. I'm like, wow, what are you adding in here to make it taste good? And can I not make this from scratch and taste the same way?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the prepackaged foods, they kind of set us up. And the fact is that we want ease, we want convenience.
Right.
I go back to the fact that when I first went gluten free and I got like the first gluten free bread that I found,
Hmm.
because I was like, okay, let me get a loaf of bread. And I think it was like about 4.50, $5, and it was teeny
Hmm.
tiny loaf of bread. It was cardboard. It was horrible. And it has not gone over any better over the years with that particular brand. So if you're celiac, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, aside from that, now we're paying $10 for that loaf of bread,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's like I I couldn't afford it, so I went to scratch cooking. One, because it was cheaper. Two, I could trust it, and like you said, it wasn't packaged with all these pretty labels, and the cost was way low. Now, way well, not way low, but it's was cheaper than doing that. But then it's time. Do I have time to do this? A lot of us
Right.
don't. We're working
Oh yeah.
moms.
Hmm.
I was working 12 to 13 hours because that's what chefs do. There's times I don't see my kids. That was another reason I went to the healthcare, because I had a little bit
Hmm.
better hours. But you know, it's just looking at what you're putting in your body and making it less complicated. Like you said, like 7 ingredients is what you're looking at. You're making your
Right.
life less complicated because it's already complicated enough with celiac disease and food allergies. Why
Right.
complicate it more by getting that food? And then,
Right.
I think there's companies out there, and I think that that's what we're moving towards, that there's companies out there that are gravitating towards that and realizing that there's a need, because people are putting their money where their mouth is, which is, no, I'm not buying it. I'm not
Right.
going to give you the
Yeah.
money. I would rather go buy this, take the time, and make it from scratch, because that way I know that I'm not going to hurt my child. Because we have to deal with preservatives and spices. I mean, garlic is in everything. My child is anaphylactic to garlic, and almost
Wow.
anything pre-made is garlic in it. I've had clients that
Hmm.
have had black pepper allergy. Same thing.
Yep.
Everything
Hmm.
pre-made, black pepper is in it. So,
Right.
we want those convenience foods, but sometimes it's not always possible. And,
Right.
I think that sticking with those rules, and then we have the power as a people, not putting your money there, just don't buy that particular product, and then review. I mean, people will notice your voice as well. So it's money and yelling at people going, that's not what we want. This is the product
Right.
we want.
Right. Exactly. I'm over here trying to find this website, a food equality initiative.
Yes.
Emily Brown,
Hmm.
when she was the CEO founder, she's the founder of it, but when
Right.
she was the CEO, I know they had a grid of the cost of food comparison, right?
Hmm.
What a pound of wheat costs versus a pound of gluten-free flour costs, right?
Right.
Or wheat flour versus regular flour. I was trying to find that, but
Hmm.
it really is paying attention and looking at those details and to keep people safe. And I forgot my question or where I was going to go with that, but it it's looking at it from the whole perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like having equality to everybody. I
Yeah.
just worked with Dare to Care here in Louisville, just to piggyback on what you were saying with
Hmm.
Emily Brown and everything and her initiative. And I know several people that, have celiac disease or that kind of thing, and they're getting food from food banks, and it has the same thing that I can only get rice, I can get vegetables.
Hmm.
They're not getting the same things because of what the community is donating, and two, what's available. What are these
Right.
companies donating to us? So it has to do with the quality of ingredients and what we can have, and the fact that
Hmm.
this, I'm living in the same city as this person, and they don't have access to safe foods for them to thrive, or their children, because of the
Hmm.
inequality of it, of everything. So
Right.
there's there in here in Louisville, we have like a lot of the community with farmers and things like that, and local grocery stores that are really good about trying to blanket, but
Hmm.
unfortunately we don't have that everywhere. And you
Right.
really do have to start at a city level with that, and then the state
Right.
level, and then go up from there. So I encourage everybody to really look at the bigger picture, and that includes the chefs at these events, and
Right.
just, you will change people's lives. They really
Yeah.
don't. You just bring so much joy to people, and it almost makes me cry. I was at an event Saturday, and this one person came up to me who had been at my class last year,
Uh-huh.
and because I do a free class, it's a how-to festival. It's only 45 minutes, so I got to talk fast and cook real quick. So we did
Uh-huh.
granola bars, and she came. One of the little boy came up to me and was like, "Can I have a hug?" I'm like, "Sure, you can." So I was like, "Give you a hug," and then she was like, "I love the fact that you said." Because they were looking at this, I kept having somebody ask a question. Well, I can't have this, I can't have this, and I have tons of substitutions on there. And I said, I looked at them and I said, "Do me a favor, stop asking me what can I have in place of that." I'm like, "What can you have? Answer that question. What can you have? Can you have pumpkin? Can you have?" So I went over the list, and I said, "This recipe is not about what you can't have. It's what can we make it to create it and what you can have."
Right.
So people get too narrowed down by it, and it's just, I
Hmm.
can't, I can't, I can't. And yes, we can. We all can, and we're all deserving of it.
That's awesome, Martha. It reminds me of Chef Jason, who you and I've told the story too, but I gave him. I used to have a card that had my can't have list because an allergy to yeast is a long list, right?
Yes, it
And
is.
then my can't, and then here's my can. And he's like, I loved having both perspectives because I could go back and reference it every time I was trying to create you something, so that okay, so she can't have this, she can't have whatever, gluten-free flour, but she can't have flour, but she can have
Right.
gluten-free flour. And what can I do to do this? And it opened up his eyes,
Mhm.
instead of saying, hey, this is my can't have list, which is pretty long. And he's like, where do I start? But looking at it from the perspective of I can eat this and I can eat that, that is like, oh, well, let me figure out how to do that. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think also as a consumer, we also need to look at it from consumers and people out here is we also need to give people time because if you came
Right.
to my restaurant and I have a huge line out the door, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be less likely to be able to do anything for you because I can't think
Right.
about that right now. If
Right.
you pose it as a question or even as a challenge, I look at it as a
Mm-hmm.
challenge. When somebody comes up to me and I have this allergy and does it and list it out, and and I can sit there and start talking to them about how to recreate a recipe. My youngest kiddo happens to have the yeast allergy as well. Can't have a lot of yeast, so they're like, "Well, you can't." And then so we start talking about things, and they're like, "Oh." Because I focus on what you can, like you
Right.
said, and people need to switch that and really challenge, and some chefs will rise to the challenge and some won't. I will
Right.
bait some chefs, okay? I will, especially or people that are like, well, we can't do that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, why can't you do this? I'll ask questions.
Right.
And the more you know about producing your food, taking cooking classes, knowing how to do foods and what substitutions work, the more you can challenge these chefs and change their minds as well. So I think
Right.
it has to be on that. But having that communication with somebody and actually being able to have a conversation, you're going to have the
Right.
people that are going to close you off. But it just depends, I think, sometimes on timing too.
Right. Yeah. Oh, definitely timing. I mean, you can't be. And for the people who are food allergic, I'm like, please speak up early so that we can, create something delicious for you. Um, oh crap! I just had this idea to ask you, but you were talking about the deliciousness of it and creating something, and I ran away. My thing ran away. My thought ran away. But
Hate it when that happens.
oh, it was the eggs. So
Eggs.
substitutions. So
Mhm.
when we had lunch, I mean, my question was going to be, what was the most surprising substitution you could do for a specific, like for egg or milk or whatever, that worked well, and you were like, holy moly, wow. And then I want to talk about your egg list.
Um, oh, okay. So the most surprising one
Mm-hmm.
would probably be I always say it wrong, so just agar 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 for what
Agar.
yeah,
Agar.
agar, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I have a speech impediment, so like some of my words just and I have dyslexia, so it's fun. Anyway, so that was one that when I first started doing the egg free thing, I was like, what the heck is that? And what can I do? So went and got it. Um, and it was because I was talking to one of my friends that happens to be Asian, and so I went down to the Asian market. We got some, and because I was like, who? Where? I went to a couple of stores. They were like, "What are you talking about?" And she was like, "Go to the Asian market," and I was like, "Okay." And I do go to the Asian market quite a bit. That's one of my hacks because people don't realize a lot of those traditional products, they're only processed around rice. So if you can have rice, you're predominantly pretty good with those.
Mm-hmm.
You need to look into them. So that's one of my hacks to reduce some pricing, and they're fine, But all that aside, that one was one of the most surprising ones for egg whites, and it's a texture I like. I like it actually a little bit better than using aquafaba.
Uh-huh.
And that one was interesting. It wasn't shocking to me about using different, liquids from beans or legumes and being able to create egg whites.
Uh-huh.
And I do find that it's not as the agar agar is a little bit more consistently being able
Uh-huh.
to produce the same amount, which with the bean water is basically what it
Okay.
is. The bean
Right.
water
Yeah. Bean
with the
water.
bean
Yeah.
water, it depends because it can depend on the freshness of the crop and how long somebody has cooked that particular one, how much actual, aquafaba you get from that and actually can
Mm-hmm.
and make it. So it will definitely
Interesting.
change.
Right.
So it can be temperamental that way. And that can be the same thing kind of like with eggs too, to a certain degree, depending on like
Right.
how they're
True.
farmed.
Yeah.
But then the fact that you can use beyond applesauce, like any fruit pectane, like
Mm-hmm.
fruit that has high pectane, you can use it. So like a lot of people are like, I can't use applesauce and then just throw it away. I was like, well, can't I use my chef brain? I was like, can't I use fruit? Like fruit? And so
Uh-huh.
we started using bananas and started using, pumpkin and different things like that. So then I created a flavor. So it wasn't just, oh, okay. And then I think those were like the two that, like, just going into those were the two that were the most surprising that you could interchange, and really looking into it. But like, and then chia seeds and I think the
Mhm.
flaxseed,
Right.
I was like, oh, there's no way. I like, because going from it, I was like, there's no way that this is going to taste good. Like, I was like,
Right.
the gumminess, or just
Right. Yeah,
I was like,
it does.
texture. I was like,
Uh-huh.
There is no way." But you have to learn the right way to apply it.
Okay.
And that's the whole thing, is like, you can't just use one substitution for another. Like, you can't use soy in every single thing. Well, one, because it's an allergen, but two, it's not going to work right for every single one. Same thing with pectane, fruit pectane. It's not going to work for every single one. You're
Right.
not going to be able to use applesauce in every single recipe and have it turn out okay. So you have to kind of really learn chemistry. So it's all about that with chemistry. And we talked about, like, I did a cooking class where we did like 18 different egg substitutions, and we went over how to do it. And then we did like French toast, which I used the flaxseed in for French toast.
Really?
So yes.
Wow.
So I
I would
also
never
tried
have
to,
thought
like,
of that. Yeah.
yeah, I tried to, like, implement it, into
Right.
everything. But, substitutions, like, ingredients are ingredients. Everybody can be allergic to anything. So
Right.
even our ingredients have ingredients. So we really need to know and
Mhm.
demand where everything is coming from.
Transparency. Yeah.
Yeah, transparency, and then
Yeah.
also learning how these things work. So it's chemistry based, but those were the I guess my takeaways on it. I really don't like very many of the shelf stable, like, egg stablers that you can find out
Mhm.
there. I feel like they give like a aftertaste, because a lot of times they have psyllium husk in them, or they have extra baking powder or baking, uh, and sometimes, like, the baking powder will have aluminum in it that they'll
Okay.
put in there, because they'll put the sodium bicarbonate, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can taste the aluminum. They may not
Really?
say it on
Wow.
there, but
Right.
I bet everybody's like, it just tastes like it has too much." Like, a friend of mine was like, "What's that?" And I said, "It tastes like it has too much baking powder in it." Like with somebody that has a really heavy-handed one with aluminum, and I don't use aluminum baking powder. So that's how I would know that I was like, I'm here tasting it. And then they were like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, like the texture was okay, but then it had left a very bitter twang that it would be if you had put too much baking powder in it."
You
So
have got a phenomenal palate.
on some days I do, some days I don't. Like, today is an allergy day, so it's not like my seasonal allergies. Probably
Mhm.
not going to be as good. You can talk to my child about the horror that they felt one time when I made orange chicken when I had a
Uh-huh.
cold, and it was like, you cannot do this again, mom.
Oh, that's hysterical. Okay, so you and I could talk on forever. I actually probably say that to every one of my guests, but I'm intrigued by what you've learned being a food allergy mom, but also a food allergy sufferer, as well as having celiac disease, and then being in this profession. So you empower me and inspire me. So thank you so much for what you
Oh,
are teaching.
well, thank you. And yeah, I could definitely talk to you all the time. We've already
We've already
established that.
determined exactly, exactly. Okay, so what we Allergy Dragon? I mean, I want to ask the question. You're going to open up a 4-wall facility. Is that correct?
Eventually is definitely the goal.
Okay. Okay.
I would say I'm hoping within the next 2 years, well, year and a half, but
Okay.
within
Awesome.
the next 5 years, yeah, I would love to be have a four walls. I would love to have some of my, what they call, my friends will call chefy recipes out there that are ready made, that people can have, like our chili that we did a chili cook off. We did not win, but we were the only vegan. We were all top 9 allergen free, gluten free, obviously, and then we were tomato free and garlic free. So we
Wow.
checked a lot of, but it didn't taste like it. And I have quite a few items that are chocolate free and things like
Mhm.
that. Because my youngest and I both cannot eat chocolate. I'm very, very, very sensitive to it, and I've definitely made sure it was not the sulfur or the dairy. It is definitely.
The
I really,
chocolate.
I really had to investigate that one very well when they were like.
You're like, I have
Anyway,
to give up chocolate?
yeah, and I'm extremely sensitive. Very, very.
Wow.
It only got worse with age, unfortunately. And
Wow.
so I like to provide foods to people that what you can have. Like, I want you
Right.
to have a red chili again if you're allergic to tomatoes and everything, like my youngest kiddo. And I want those things. So I like that. And that's why I call Allergy Dragon, because it's,
You're slaying the.
I'm slaying them. So I'd like to have items that I can actually put out there in the grocery stores
Okay.
and really kind of break or slay the cycle, as you put it, of the fat stereotype that gluten-free and food allergy free from means free from taste, and it doesn't.
Right.
Just means free from allergens. It's all food at the end of the day. And I just want to empower more people with cooking classes, virtually and in person, and that's what I hope to do with that space. And then possibly outsource it to other people in the area that are looking for a place that there is safe for them to produce more allergy-friendly products. So I think that that's something that we really need in the allergy space for us.
Awesome. Well, I just put your website up here. You can connect with Martha at allergydragon.com. And I do want to end with the one question that I ask everybody is, what does this doing all of this work, being a sufferer, but also being, I say a sufferer in being somebody with food allergies and celiac disease, but also being a chef, what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive dining experience look like to you?
It definitely, pretty much every single thing I've said today has kind of led up to this question as well. So, which is just including everybody at the dinner table with a delicious meal. If you have got, let's say, sausage, for instance, the sausage thing, you have sausage, you have it all for everybody. You don't have to worry about that cross contact with the cooking of it and the placement of it. And it's already in my bottom line. So I have less waste because I don't have 2-3 different options. I have this sausage, which happens to be safe for, 80% of the people here or 90% of the people here, depending on the allergens. And so that goes into your bottom line. And it's sustainable because you have less waste and everybody's happy. And it translates to your bottom line. It's really that simple as just giving people good food and not making things so difficult. So that's what it means to me, is just not making things difficult and including everybody at the same time. Like I said, I've pretty much said it all throughout this whole thing. Go back and watch it. And that's what it means to me. Awesome. At the end of the day.
And you have a fan on here, Cynthia Dennis, says, "Tame your dragon." Thank you, Chef Martha Morgan. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for tuning in. We appreciate it. Everybody, it is Food Allergy Awareness Week. Please, please, please reach out to Martha, executive chef that can help you tame the food allergy and celiac disease dragons that you think you have in your kitchen. You can reach her at allergydragon.com. Martha, we really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to chatting with you more.
Same. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Everybody, we'll be back here next Wednesday, same time, 12 o'clock. I am actually talking to a bed and breakfast owner I think she's in Maryland. Yeah, Maryland. Completely gluten-free bed and breakfast.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that one.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So stay here next week. And until then, stay safe and eat well. Thanks.
Bye.